Queen Victoria of the United Kingdom. Today, on the 24th of May 2026, is no ordinary day, as it is the 206th anniversary of Queen Victoria's birth. Most people, I believe, think of Queen Victoria as an old woman who would always weirdly dress in black. However, Queen Victoria wasn't just that. She was a wife, a mother, and a daughter. And in today's video, I'm actually going to properly tell you the story of Queen Victoria from her birth all the way up until her death. Princess Alexandrina Victoria was born at 4:15 a.m. on the Monday of the 24th of May 1819 in the dining room of Kensington Palace. It may seem rather odd now that a royal would be specifically born in a dining room. However, this was chosen because hot water could be brought up from the kitchen below. Victoria's parents were Edward, Duke of Kent and Strafford, and Victoria of Saxe-Coburg-Saalfeld. Now, at the time of her birth, it was a massive relief to the British royal family. That's because 2 years before Victoria's birth, Princess Charlotte Augusta of Wales died in 1817. Charlotte was the only grandchild of King George III and Queen Charlotte of Mecklenburg-Strelitz. The lively, outspoken princess was expected to become queen one day. She was betrothed to Prince Leopold of Saxe-Coburg-Saalfeld. Leopold would, of course, become the first king of the Belgians, and was actually Queen Victoria's uncle, being the brother of the Duchess of Kent. However, as history went, Charlotte and Leopold did not end up ruling together, as Charlotte died in childbirth in 1817. The British family and Parliament had a massive panic, as all of King George III and Queen Charlotte's sons had a bunch of mistresses. They also were middle-aged and not in any way going to produce an heir. Parliament got 2 of the sons, William and Edward, to find good German wives and start making some babies. And the product of all of this was, of course, Queen Victoria. Victoria was christened in the Capula Room of Kensington Palace on the 24th of June 1819 by the Archbishop of Canterbury, Charles Manners Sutton. The Duke and Duchess of Kent chose the names Georgiana, Alexandrina, Charlotte and Augusta for their new little girl. However, the Prince Regents, Prince George, the Prince of Wales, who was the eldest son of King George III, absolutely refused these names, as Tsar Alexander of Russia was going to be one of Queen Victoria's godparents, and it was the reason that they were proposing the name Alexandrina. The Tsar would have been offended if Georgiana was in front of Alexandrina, and the Prince Regent would have been offended if Alexandrina was in front of Georgiana. After also denying the names Charlotte and Augusta, the Duchess of Kent was driven to tears. Finally, the Prince Regent spat out that the name Victoria should be used, and so the little girl was christened Alexandrina Victoria. Throughout her childhood, Victoria was known as Alexandrina, or the shortened version of the name, Drina. When Victoria was a baby, her mother, the Duchess of Kent, said that she was a pretty little princess, plump as a partridge. In August, little Victoria was vaccinated. She was actually the first royal to do so, and it was a vaccination against smallpox. At the end of August, on the 26th or the 31st, word reached the Duke and Duchess of Kent that a new little baby had been born. The baby was the second son of Ernest III, Duke of Saxe-Coburg-Saalfeld, and his wife Louise, Duchess of Saxe-Coburg-Saalfeld. The little boy, who was born on the 26th of August, was named Albert. In December of 1819, the Duke and Duchess of Kent went to Salisbury, where they were staying with the Bishop Dr. Fisher. Soon, the couple reached where they would be staying in Salisbury, Willbrook Cottage, on Christmas Eve. A few days after Christmas Eve, Edward wrote to a friend about his daughter. He wrote, "My little girl thrives under the influence of a Devonshire climate, and is, I'm delighted to say, strong and healthy." The Duke of Kent, however, caught a cold while in Salisbury, and in the weeks after, it got very much worse. The young Baron Stockmar came down from Coburg to Salisbury to check on Edward. However, he found there was really nothing wrong and there was no cause for alarm. However, Edward continued to get worse, and by the 18th, he was taken to bed and he had a fever and delirium. The doctors tried to cure Edward with bloodletting as well as other wacky treatments, however obviously didn't work. On the 22nd of January, Edward realised that he was dying when he was lucid in fear of delirium, so he started to write his will rather quickly. And on the morning of the 23rd of January 1820, Edward died. The Duchess of Kent was now widowed for a second time, however this time was much more poorer. She could have gone back to Coburg when she had her own palace, and she could have lived cheaply off of her first husband's revenue. However, she also knew that it was probably the best idea to have the probable future monarch of the United Kingdom to be well raised in the United Kingdom. 6 days after the death of the Duke of Kent, King George III died, making the Prince Regent and the Prince of Wales now King George IV. Eventually, everyone decided that the Duchess of Kent would just live in, Kensington Palace. During this time, the Duchess began to rely on two people. One of those people was her brother, Prince Leopold of Saxe-Coburg-Saalfeld. He had a rather huge income of £50,000, which was given to him during his marriage to Princess Charlotte, and was not revoked from him even after her death. The other person that the Duchess of Kent came to rely on was none other than Sir John Conroy. The Duke and Duchess of Kent had known Conroy for a while, and after the Duke's death, Sir John quickly became the comptroller of the Duchess of Kent. Together, the Duchess of Kent and Conroy created the infamous Kensington system. The Kensington system was supposed to keep little Victoria safe. However, in actuality, it was literally just to control her. The little girl was not allowed to leave her mother, her two governesses, Baroness Leeson of the Duchess of Northumberland, or even her tutor's side. The Duchess and Conroy also monitored and recorded any single interaction that Victoria had, and they rather strictly kept her isolated from other children. Victoria, however, did have two playmates, her older sister, Princess Theodora of Lenging, and one of Conroy's daughters, Victoire. Victoria also was not allowed to go down the stairs alone and had to be always holding someone's hand, and she also was not allowed to sleep in another room if it wasn't her mother's. Victoria's education began when she was 5 years old. Her first teacher was John Davies, the Dean of Chester, and he instructed the little girl on scripture. When Victoria was 8, she started learning decorum, reading and writing from Baroness Louise Leeson. Leeson was one of Victoria's governesses and also one of her biggest supports in her melancholy childhood. The Duchess of Kent forced a rather strict daily schedule for Victoria's education. Her morning lessons began at 9:30 a.m. with a break at 11:30 a.m. The lessons would then resume at 3 p.m. and then they would end at 5 p.m. When Victoria was still under the Kensington system, one of her closest companions was her older sister, Princess Theodora of Lenging. Despite being 12 years older than Victoria, Theodora absolutely loved Victoria and the two were inseparable. Victoria was quite upset when in early 1828 Theodora married Ernest I, Prince of Hohenlohe-Langenburg. 2 years after Theodora left, on the 26th of June 1830, King George IV died. 3 years prior to that, in 1827, Prince Frederick, the Duke of York and Albany, had also died. The third son of George III, Prince William, was now King William IV, and now Princess Alexandrina Victoria was heir presumptive to the British throne. On the 14th of January 1833, a new little companion entered Victoria's life. This little pup was none other than Dash, Victoria's most famous dog and King Charles Spaniel. The day after Dash arrived at Kensington Palace, Victoria wrote about him in her diary. She wrote, "Mamma's little dog, a beautiful spaniel of King Charles' breed called Dash, and which Sir John gave her yesterday, came and will now remain here. Little Dash is perfection. He's already much attached to Mamma and always lies at her feet." Dash was one of the frequent things that Victoria would sketch. Victoria started her drawings at the age of 8 in 1827. As she progressed into a teenager, she started to use ink much more and developed very greatly. When Victoria was a teenager, the more likely assumption that she was going to be queen was all heightened, as King William IV had no surviving legitimate children. His legitimate children were Princess Charlotte Augusta Louisa of Clarence, who was born and died on the 27th of March 1819, a stillborn child who was born and died on the 5th of September 1819, Princess Elizabeth Georgiana Adelaide of Clarence, who was born on the 10th of December 1820 and died on the 4th of March 1821, and lastly, stillborn twin boys, who were born and died on the 8th of April 1822. Now, in 1830, the Regency Act of, 1830 was made, and this was so if William died before Victoria reached the age of 18, then her mother would act as regent. However, William and his wife, Queen Adelaide, weren't exactly too happy about this idea of the Duchess becoming a regent, and once in Victoria's presence in 1836, he declared that he would not die until Victoria reached the age of 18. Now, Leopold had actually become the King of the Belgians, and he became it in 1831. And Leopold hoped that Victoria would marry her cousin, Albert, and the two first met in May of 1836. Victoria wrote that Albert is extremely handsome. Victoria later wrote to Leopold to thank him for the prospect of great happiness you have contributed to me in giving the person of dear Albert. He possesses every quality that could be desired to render me perfectly happy. He is so sensible, so kind, and so good, and so admirable, too. He has, besides, the most pleasing and delightful exterior and appearance you can possibly see. However, as Victoria was 17 and Albert was only, 16 at the time, so we had no rush to get married. On the 20th of June 1837, Queen Victoria wrote in her diary, "I was awoke at 6 o'clock by Mamma, who told me the Archbishop of Canterbury and Lord Cunningham were here and wished to see me. I got out of bed and went to my sitting room, only my dressing gown and alone, and I saw them. Lord Cunningham then acquainted me and told me that my poor uncle, the king, was no more, and had expired at 12 minutes past 2 this morning, and consequently that I am queen." In the official documents that were prepared on the first day of her reign, described Victoria as Alexandrina Victoria, but Alexandrina was withdrawn, and from then on she was simply known as Victoria. Since 1714, the monarchs of Britain were also the monarchs of Hanover. However, under Sailor Law, the females were excluded from the Hanoverian succession. So, Queen Victoria's unpopular uncle, Aunt Augustus, the Duke of Cumberland, became the King of Hanover, and he would remain Victoria's heir presumptive until she had a child. At the time of Victoria's accession, the government was being led by the Whig Prime Minister, Lord William Lamb, the second Viscount of Melbourne, or more commonly known as Lord William Melbourne or just Lord Melbourne. As Victoria was, not at all, politically, good, she relied very heavily on Melbourne. Victoria likely saw him as a father figure and also probably liked him as a, husband. Obviously, since Melbourne was around 50, that was never going to really plan out, but still. Victoria also was the first sovereign to take up residence at Buckingham Palace. Previously, the home for the monarch was St. James's Palace, and still to this day, King Charles III lives in Buckingham Palace. Victoria's coronation took place on the 20th of June 1838, and over 400,000 visitors came to London to see it, or at least, actually see the celebrations. And after the coronation, Victoria actually quickly ran upstairs to give Dash his, regular bath. In 1839, Melbourne decided to resign after the Radicals and the Tories voted against a bill to suspend the Constitution of Jamaica. Victoria was, quite angry at Melbourne for deciding to resign and utterly refused Sir Robert Peel to become Prime Minister. This was also because Peel wanted to, take away 6 of the 25 ladies-in-waiting of Victoria, as her ladies-in-waitings were the wives of Whigs, and Peel wanted some wives of Tories. This situation would later be known as the bedchamber crisis. In October of 1839, Albert visited Windsor. Victoria and him fell madly in love, and she proposed to him on the 15th of October. And on the 10th of February 1840, the two were married at St. James's Palace. That night, Victoria wrote about the event in her diary. She wrote, "I have never spent such an evening. My dearest Albert. His excessive love and affection gave me feelings of heavenly love and happiness I could never have hoped to have felt before. He clasped me in his arms and we kissed each other again and again. His beauty, his sweetness and gentleness. Really, how can I ever be thankful enough to have such a husband? To be called names of tenderness I have never yet heard used for me before. It was bliss beyond belief. Oh, this was the happiest day of my life." The two were madly in love, and Albert became the most important political advisor to Victoria. He also helped the relations between Victoria and the Duchess of Kent. Not long after the wedding, Victoria fell pregnant. When she was found pregnant, the mad Edward Oxford tried to assassinate her while she was riding in a carriage with Albert. Luckily, neither Victoria and Albert were injured. Their first child, Victoria, the Princess Royal, more commonly known as Vicky, was born without any complications on the 21st of November 1840. 8 more children followed after Vicky. Albert Edward, more commonly known as Bertie, born on the 9th of November 1841. Alice, born on the 25th of April 1843. Alfred, known as Affy, born on the 6th of August 1844. Helena, known as Lenchen, born on the 25th of May 1846. Louise, born on the 18th of March 1848. Arthur, born on the 1st of May 1850. Leopold, born on the 7th of April 1858. And finally, Beatrice, born on the 14th of April 1857. Despite having 9 children, Victoria hated being pregnant and thought that newborns were ugly. In the 1841 general election, the Whigs were finally defeated and people finally became the Prime Minister. And the situations about the ladies-in-waiting were sorted. In 1845, Ireland was hit by a potato blight, and for the next 4 years, over 1 million Irish people died and another million immigrated, in what became known as the quite famous Great Famine. Victoria was labelled as the Famine Queen in Ireland, despite in January of 1847 she personally donated £2,000, which was more than any famine donor. In 1846, Peel decided to resign after the repeal of the Corn Laws barely passed, and he was replaced by Lord John Russell. In 1851, Vicky at the Great Exhibition met Prince Frederick Wilhelm of Prussia. The two quickly got on, and Victoria and Albert arranged a marriage proposal for the two. Vicky and Frederick married on the 25th of January 1858. Victoria was quite upset about Vicky leaving, and in one of her letters she wrote, "When I look round to all of your sweet, happy, unconscious sisters and think I must give them up too, one by one." Almost exactly a year later after the wedding, Vicky gave birth to Queen Victoria and Prince Albert's first grandchild, Wilhelm, who would become the last German emperor and the Kaiser of Prussia. In the beginning of December of 1861, Albert became very unwell. After a few weeks of struggling with illness, Albert died on the 14th of December 1861 from what was presumed to be typhoid fever. However, modern historians don't believe that might actually be correct. Victoria entered a state of mourning and depression, and she only wore black for the remainder of her life. She avoided London and public appearances, and her weight increased through comfort eating. Not only did Victoria rely heavily on the forward Beatrice, she also relied heavily on John Brown. Rumours speculated that the two had even had a secret marriage, and many began to refer to Victoria as Mrs. Brown. On the 1st of May 1876, Queen Victoria was proclaimed the Empress of India. and this was mostly because of the Indian Rebellion of 1857. However, on the 14th of December 1878, Princess Alice died of diphtheria. Alice had been the Grand Duchess of Hesse by Rheims and the, wife of Louis IV, Grand Duke of Hesse. Victoria took the now, partly orphaned Hessian children under her care, and one of those children, Alex, more commonly known as Alexandra, became the Empress of Russia and the wife of Tsar Nicholas II. On the 28th of March 1884, Leopold died from a brain hemorrhage, which was due to his haemophilia. Leopold was the youngest of Victoria's 9 children to die, as he was only 30, and he left behind his daughter Alice and his future son Charles Edward, who was born after he died. In 1887, Victoria celebrated her Golden Jubilee, which celebrated her 50th anniversary on the throne. On the 23rd of June 1887, Victoria met Adol Karim. Adol taught Victoria Urdu and acted as a clerk. However, the royal family was not at all, glad that Victoria had made a new friend and accused him of spying. Victoria, however, dismissed any complaints about Adol as just racial prejudice. On the 30th of July 1900, Alfred died. And at 6:30 p.m. on the 22nd of January 1901, Queen Victoria died at the age of 81, with her funeral taking place on the 2nd of February. Victoria's reign lasted 63 years, 7 months and 2 days, making her the second longest reigning British monarch. But that's all for today's video. I'll see you in the next one. Bye, y'all!